topic today is working with how do we stay regulated around someone who's really anxious or dysregulated. As always, we're really looking to be kind and compassionate with ourselves, to not shame ourselves or shame other people for the nervous systems that we have. Co-regulation and emotional labor. Emotional labor meaning who does the most work in terms of keeping the nervous system steady, who talks and who listens. I've noticed a lot of changes over the years in my relationships to really pay attention to that. And as my nervous system became more regulated, then I'm much more available to be present with other people and, of course, with myself. Most of us are familiar with the feeling of ranting. We just get off on something and we're in a fight response or we're really activated. And we're not so much thinking about how that's landing for the other person. We've probably also all been on the other side of that where somebody else is ranting. We feel a little bit like they've forgotten that we're here. It's not really a dialogue, it's more of a monologue. Let's sit with that just for a moment. What's your situation generally over time and generally right now? Really recognizing and acknowledging that all relationships have times when the other person is more or less available to us. So if we're looking at over a long period of time, often this is true with family, often too with long-term friends. Is there an overall balancing out over time, or is it more they talk, I listen, or the other way? So this picture really captures what it feels like, I think, when somebody's talking at us. And the thing about people who talk at other people is that it's a way to regulate their own nervous system. It just comes pouring out. I really noticed that with my sister when she was nervous or excited. She would just talk and talk and talk and talk. A lot of the talking was not about something that I cared about. It was like that stream of thought in her head, only this time it came out through her mouth. It was difficult to be around because when people are activated like that, it does feel like a fire hose of words and we're kind of backed up against the wall. I also noticed that people who tend to do that often will pause in the middle of a sentence and then they won't pause at the end. So it's hard to interrupt people who talk like that. We feel quite rude interrupting somebody who's clearly dysregulated. So we don't want to be nasty to someone, although we also might want to take some steps to intervene. Next week, we're going to really work around intervening and setting boundaries around this. This week, we're going to work with kind of how that feels and what our experience is with that. We feel objectified or dehumanized, like a receptacle for their anxiety. I would often feel like it didn't really matter who she was talking to. She just needed to talk to get that energy out. And that can make us feel like we're not really an equal participant. This is something different from someone who does this through entitlement. They've done a lot of studies around who interrupts who and how that relates to power, who talks the most and how that relates to power. If you have someone like a boss, for instance, who monologues at you all the time, it's hard to get away from that because it affects your workplace. And they've also done a lot of studies that men interrupt women way more than women interrupt men. So we're not really talking about that kind of entitlement to be the one that's heard. It's another issue that's related, but it's not really what we're working with right now. What we're really working with is how can we regulate our own nervous system? How can we be there in an authentic and supportive way for someone who does a lot of this kind of overwhelming talking? And also, what does that feel like for us? What does that cost us? One of the things I really noticed it cost me in my relationship with that sister was that I felt like I had to protect myself. I felt like she didn't really know me because she never listened. I never really had a chance to talk. So it really affected the authenticity and the connection in the relationship. Let's sit with this for a bit. Notice your nervous system right now. Notice your body and your breath. Maybe we could take a couple of deep breaths. In through the nose, long exhale like you're breathing out through the mouth like a thin straw. You could hold your own hand Look around the room. Notice that you're not in that situation right now. There's nobody talking at you. You're not in a conversation with someone who's talking at you right now. So we're going to work with memory. We're going to work with staying present in this moment as we work with that memory. Bring to mind somebody who has a pattern of doing that. One of the things that happens when someone else is very dysregulated, whether they're doing this anxiety talking or not, when someone's really dysregulated, they don't have the capacity to tune into us. They might not really know what's going on. Am I emotionally ready and steady and grounded? And can I do this conversation right now? I might be hanging on by a thread and they don't really seem to notice because they're really wrapped up in their own dysregulation. Let's sit with that. Bring to mind somebody or a few somebodies and see if you could keep yourself really present. You notice your feet, your seat, your breath. What does it cost you to let that happen? I don't mean let that happen in terms of I'm weak because I'm letting it. I'm not like that. Just this is happening and it's difficult to intervene for lots of reasons. We might really love that person, have a lot of compassion for them. And this pattern is hard for us to, in any given moment, what does it cost me to let someone rant or talk like that? And can I afford it at that moment? See what comes forward. Notice your body and your breath as you're thinking about this. And maybe times are coming to mind when you really weren't able to be that for them, that you couldn't be the regulating force in that conversation at that moment, and they didn't really notice. What do you do then? Especially as we're doing this work, we can recognize more and more clearly our own state of regulation or dysregulation and theirs as well. When someone else is dysregulated, we feel that in our body. It's dysregulating for us as well. And then we can come back into the breath. We notice our feet, our seat. We have all of these tools now that we can regulate ourselves. And that's very regulating for them as well. But how do you feel? Sometimes I would feel really disappointed, kind of let down. That's the softer side of it. More often I would be angry and feel like I needed to protect myself. There's just this torrent of words. So let it come to mind, whatever the situation is that you're thinking. Most often, these are long term, chronic things that happen. Sometimes it's a dysregulation that's due to a specific thing. I have a lot more tolerance for that if it's occasional. If it's a pattern in the relationship, what is your responsibility to yourself? When that's difficult for you, and you know it's difficult for them, what is your responsibility to yourself? How could you work with that in a way that's supportive for you and also for them, perhaps? But right now, we're focusing on ourselves. Sometimes when we're bringing something like this up, we'll get kind of lost in a train of thought or memory. So keep yourself regulated and here. Notice your breath, your feet, your seat. Notice there might be a lot of emotion. There might be some fight, flight, or freeze response going on. There might be sadness or grief or powerlessness. Sense into what is here. You might see the person in front of you or remember a time when this was happening. And notice if this is something that's a regular pattern in your relationship. And if you're in a fight, flight, or freeze, see if you can come out of that. If you find that you're frustrated and angry with them, or if you're shut down and you've kind of just drifted off somewhere else, or if you're in a flight. And when we look at this, it might be that's a memory of how you normally cope with that too. See if you can come back into this grounded awareness. What else is here? What do you feel? Connected, disconnected with yourself, with them, angry, sad. And as we're doing that, we could look at some inquiry questions as well. So we know that it's difficult right now, especially in the world. A lot of people are not as steady and grounded as they were before COVID, and a lot of people are under a lot of different kinds of pressure. One of the things that we could do is to work with looking at, am I shaming myself for any of this? I used to certainly shame myself around not being more tolerant with my sister, or wondering, why don't I speak up, have more of a dialogue, which I would do at times. Is there anything that you're shaming yourself about? Maybe it's you're shaming yourself that you have a nervous system that's pretty dysregulated right now. Maybe you're thinking about all the times when you've gone off on a rant or when you've been in a freeze while somebody else is. Letting go of shaming is really helpful. One thing that we can do is to take responsibility for building capacity. If we have a nervous system that gets really dysregulated by some things, then we can work with, well, I know that if I get more rest, if I eat good food, if I don't push things, if I limit the amount of time I'm with that person, I'm going to be more grounded. So we could build our nervous system. We could do these practices. We could work with these tools. And sometimes I think it's frustrating for us as well when the other person doesn't seem to be doing that. We are doing all of this work to regulate our nervous system, and it doesn't look like they're doing it. So here they come with their completely dysregulated nervous system, and they put that on us. That's another thing that you might have some feelings about, feeling angry or disappointed or whatever that might be. It's another element. We could allow ourselves to feel that when the other person isn't really able to meet us in regulation. This is really a deep seated, long lasting pattern. Whether we're the person who does the anxiety talking or whether we have someone in our life who does and we go into freeze, we also get into that. All of these different patterns are common, and we could always bring more kindness to ourselves, more compassion for ourselves. We could do that as we're building strength in our nervous system, as we're noticing those patterns. Can we be open and compassionate and kind about this? We're not looking to blame somebody for what's going on in their nervous system. And what's the impact on me? Can I afford it now? Long term, how much can I do that? Could I afford it once a week for a half an hour? Could I afford it every day for an hour? Different answer for those, probably. How could we move into taking care of ourselves around this without closing our heart or getting into a fight, flight, freeze response? Sit with that too. How could I be open hearted and on my own side and take care of myself without going into some kind of an alienating, closed heart or anger with the other person? Stay on your own side, stay kind, stay regulated, notice your body, your breath. And as we're coming towards the end of the inquiry, notice what it is that came through your mind during the different times. Is it a certain person? Is it several people? Do you feel like there are some steps that you can take? Do you feel kind of trapped? Notice what came forward. There might be a lot here to work with. Next week, we're going to work more with what do we do once we recognize this? What steps can we take? What do we want to do? What are we willing to do? This is often with people that we care about, or as with ourselves. Let's work with that just for a minute or two as we finish. With an open heart and compassion, how can I work with this?